So in this, also part of the video, we're going to try the carburetor down. You're just going to really need an 8mm and using those pliers. So we're going to start pulling off this. So we won't need this anymore. Actually, you might need one of those little picks that you can get from like Harbor Freight, these little guys. Or really, you can get them anywhere. But this needs to come off. And undo these two 8mm bolts. There's a screw head, but 9 times out of 10 you're gonna strip them. So we'll go ahead and get that off. And then the other part, this is the vacuum secondary, which we won't need that anymore either, because, and there's another clip down here, because we're going to make this into a manual secondary when we're done. And yes, it's leaking fuel. Sometimes it can be a pain to get off. I'll trust the absorbent rag. So get this off. So you will have to come, well, you don't necessarily have to, but I like to cut this portion off and this portion off, so you just have the throttle bracket left. Looks cleaner that way. Save the screws because you're gonna need those later. Got that one off. And you just got the vacuum hose that's still holding everything on. Alright, and I'll take this piece, set it aside because you will need it later. And then we can take off this one back here also. Kind of same ordeal. It's got a Carter pin and all that stuff back here. Pretty simple to take off. Again, some more 8mm bolts, which these are actually surprisingly loose. Usually they're quite a bit harder to get off. It makes me wonder if this has actually been apart before, because usually it's, I wouldn't say it's a bear, but it definitely, but usually quite a bit tighter. So that can go into your junk pile. This is the fuel solenoid. It just, when you turn power off, it stops supplying fuel to the engine. And then next we'll take off part of the choke mechanism. This actually just pops on and off, so you really just need a flathead screwdriver for back here, and that pops off like that. And then you have two 8mm bolts that are here and here. I don't know if you guys can see, there and there. Pull that off. Sometimes you got to use the extension, or you might actually have to use a boxed end wrench. Which in this case we might actually have to use a boxed end wrench, but I'll try getting this vacuum line off and see what happens. So for this one down here, you'll have to use a wrench to get things started. That piece can come off, and then this can come off, because you won't need this little vacuum bracket anymore. Then put the screw back in, or bolt I should say. Makes me wonder if this has been apart before, because these are all kind of loose. So that's pretty much the breakdown of that. The choke, like I said, in this process, the choke actually has to come off, because you have to convert this to a manual choke or no choke at all. But I've never been able to figure out how to make the electric choke still work with all this vacuum stuff, so I just go to a manual choke. It's much simpler, in my opinion. So you got to undo the choke adjustment screws here, because there's two gates to get to here, and then there's actually one on the other side of this thing, cover if you want to call it, to pull the choke off. I have spent some time to figure out how to make the electric choke still work. I just can't figure it out. So if somebody does, it'd be great information to share. That could save a little bit of hassle if people aren't into the idea of having an electric or a manual choke, but you know, it is what it is. I guess sacrifice something for occasionally. So you got this one, you got this one, you got this one to take out, which looks like this has been apart before. These are usually the biggest pain, is that one right there. So I swear they put Loctite on some of this stuff. but really it's just over the years it's got kind of frozen in there, I guess, if you want to say. Actually came out quite easily. A little bit of persuasion, and that pulls off the choke. It's pretty simple design. Like I said, I've tried to figure out how to make this actually work, but I haven't been able to find that yet. So here's your choke. What engages the choke? I mean, it's pretty much what you're going to strip the carburetor down to. You're just taking off a few pieces, nothing major. Accelerator pump. We'll pull the rest of this vacuum stuff off. If you feel risky enough, you can pull the few bolts that hold the top on and see how dirty it is inside, but I usually don't do that. So you got your throttle adjustment, your idle adjustment, all that stuff. So go ahead and get all these vacuum hoses off, and we'll start with, actually some of these are coming off pretty easy. So this is what you're stripped down, except for this vacuum hose. This is what your stripped down carburetor will look like. Pretty stripped down. This here is I honestly just put like an interior screw in there to block that off. And it seems kind of ghetto, but it does work excellent. So we'll go ahead and spray it down with some carb cleaner, get it cleaned off, and then we will make this a manual secondary instead of a vacuum secondary. So for this aspect of making it a now manual secondary, because if you look, just one opens currently. So what we're going to do is we're going to need 2 small zip ties and some dikes and a 10. And we're going to zip tie these 2 together, so when you actuate the throttle, it actually pulls it open. So it's pretty simple. So as you can see, it's really one zip tie goes this way. Leave it a little loose. And then the other zip tie goes through it like so. And you're just kind of pulling tight. And voila. Simple as that. Now you have a manual secondary. Now, you could use wire of some kind if you'd like. It's all up to you, but zip ties, easy to work with, they're handy, and fairly durable. So I'm not too worried about that aspect of things, but that's how simple it is to go to a manual secondary on the carburetor. Works just like stock. Pretty simple. So, as I was talking about 3-barrel, now that I have this apart, I can show you guys a little bit better. There's one here. There's this one. So this is the primary. This is the secondary. And then, I don't know how well the camera will pick it up, but you can see in there, there's a little butterfly that opens. Kind of hardly opens at all, actually. But that's for the CVCC. That's what that pre-fuel in the combustion chamber. So now that we got that all worked out, real simple. Don't even have to pull anything off. Actually, don't even need a 10. So, actually, I lied. The 10 is to take. No, you leave. This can come off, but I'm gonna leave it because if not, then you got to come up with some sort of spacer. So I'll just leave that. But so that's pretty much that aspect of making it manual carb. Real simple, nothing too complicated. As I said before, go ahead and check the top of your carburetor hat, see if you got any loose bolts or screws, and that could be half of your problem as it is. So we'll go ahead now. So, you know, this is a good time to check over your carburetor, blow it off. This is the sight window for the float bowl. I don't know if you guys can, how well you guys can see that. So we'll talk about that here shortly. It's just a good time to give it a once over. I'm gonna actually hit this with some carb cleaner here in a minute. Oh, and one more thing I'd like to mention. This is the air fuel mixture screw. So I'm gonna get this running. I like to turn this in about 1 to 2 turns because you take all this stuff off, it changes the vacuum. That ideally kind of makes the carburetor run a little richer. So you can also check the plugs, but I like to go about 1.5 to 2 turns. That'll depend on where you're at, I guess, elevation and so forth. But it's one thing to watch out for. Most people, I shouldn't say most, when some people do this, they don't actually adjust this. So you can get a little bit better performance and mileage by tinkering with this. So I'm going to go ahead and get this cleaned off, and then we will talk about vacuum lines and vacuum caps and